Imagine waking up one day and discovering that all your people are condemned to death, and the only person who can stop it is you. But there's a problem. Trying to save your people could cost you your own life. What would you do? This is the true story of Esther, a young Jewish girl who went from orphan to Queen of Persia and faced the impossible to save her people. But how did she do it? And would you have the same courage? Stay until the end to find out. In times when the fate of an entire people can depend on the courage of a single person, Esther's story stands out. A young Jewish girl who, against all odds, became Queen of Persia and saved her nation from destruction. Her extraordinary account is a story of faith, courage, and divine providence, showing how God can use ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary feats. Get ready to embark on a fascinating journey through the halls of power, palace intrigues, and decisions that change the course of history. In the 3rd year of the reign of Xerxes, king of Persia, a great banquet was held in the citadel of Shushan. As described in Esther 1:1-3, Xerxes ruled 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia, and in order to show off the wealth of his empire, he offered an impressive feast that lasted 180 days. At the end of this period, the king held another 7-day banquet for all the inhabitants of the citadel, from the humblest to the noblest. The palace was adorned with fine white and blue fabrics, and the guests drank from golden goblets, each one different from the other. On the 7th day of the celebration, when the wine had already gladdened the king's heart, he ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him so that her beauty could be admired by all. However, something unexpected happened. As Esther 1:12 relates, Vashti refused to appear before the king, which infuriated Xerxes. Faced with this affront, he consulted his advisers to decide what to do. One of them, Memucan, suggested that Vashti be deposed, arguing that her attitude might encourage other women to defy their husbands. The king and his nobles agreed, and a decree was issued that Vashti should never return to the king's presence. With the absence of a queen, Xerxes' servants proposed a solution, that the most beautiful young women in the kingdom should be brought together, so that the king could choose a new queen. This plan pleased the king, and so began the search for a successor to Vashti. Among the young women chosen was Hadassah, better known as Esther, a Jewish orphan brought up by her cousin Mordecai. As mentioned in Esther 2:5-7, Mordecai was a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin who had once been taken into exile. Esther, as well as being beautiful, possessed a special grace that soon caught the eye of Hegai, who was in charge of the royal harem. Esther 2:9 says that she found favor with Hegai, who immediately arranged beauty treatments, special food, and the best accommodations for her. Mordecai, however, advised Esther not to reveal her Jewish origin, and she followed his instructions. After a long period of preparations, it was Esther's turn to present herself to the king. She asked for nothing more than what Hegai suggested, and according to Esther 2:15, her presence captivated everyone. When Esther was finally presented to King Xerxes, something unexpected happened. The king was charmed by her more than by any other young woman, and according to Esther 2:17, he placed the royal crown on her head, making her queen in place of Vashti. To celebrate his choice, the king offered a great banquet in Esther's honor, declared a holiday in all the provinces, and distributed gifts with great generosity. Meanwhile, Mordecai, who was usually at the palace gates, discovered a plot against the king. 2 palace officials, Bigtan and Teres, were plotting to assassinate Xerxes. Esther 2:22 tells us that Mordecai revealed the plot to Esther, who in turn warned the king, giving the credit to Mordecai. The accusation was investigated, proven, and the conspirators were executed. This was recorded in the history books of the kingdom, but at the time Mordecai received no reward. Later, the king promoted a man called Haman, making him the highest-ranking official in the kingdom. Esther 3:1 tells us that Xerxes gave Haman a higher position than all the other nobles, ordering all the officials to bow down to him as a sign of respect. However, Mordecai refused to prostrate himself because, as a Jew, he could not revere another human being as if he were divine. Mordecai's insistence on not kneeling infuriated Haman. Esther 3:5-6 reveals that on discovering that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman decided not only to punish Mordecai, but to eliminate all his people. He convinced the king to issue a decree ordering the extermination of all the Jews in the empire on a specific date, the 12th month, the month of Adar. The royal edict was sent to all the provinces, announcing that Jewish men, women, and children would be destroyed and their property plundered. When Mordecai heard the news, he tore his clothes, covered himself in ashes, and went into the streets crying out in great despair. In all the provinces, the Jews wept, fasted, and dressed in mourning. Esther 4:4 tells us that the queen's maidservants informed her of Mordecai's condition, and she, worried, sent a messenger to find out what was going on. Mordecai explained the decree and asked Esther to intercede with the king on behalf of his people. However, Esther faced a dangerous dilemma. No one, not even the queen, could present themselves to the king without being summoned, on pain of death, unless Xerxes extended his golden scepter. Esther 4:11 reveals her concern. "I have not been called before the king for 30 days. Mordecai responded with striking words, recorded in Esther 4:13-14. "Do not think that because you are in the king's palace, you will be the only one to escape. For if you remain silent now, help and deliverance will come to the Jews from elsewhere. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows if it wasn't for a moment like this that you reached the position of queen." With these words, Esther realized that she couldn't run away from her responsibility. So she decided to act. Taking courage from the gravity of the situation, Esther sent a message to Mordecai with a request that all the Jews of Shushan fast for 3 days and 3 nights for her. According to Esther 4:16, she declared, "I and my maidservants will also fast. After that I will go to the king, even if it is against the law, and if I have to die, I will die." After 3 days of fasting and prayer, Esther put on her royal clothes and went to the king's throne. This was the decisive moment. If Xerxes didn't accept her, she could be executed. But when the king saw her standing in the inner court, he was pleased with her and held out his golden scepter, allowing her to approach. Esther 5:2 describes this tense moment of relief. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, he took pity on her and held out to her the golden scepter he had in his hand. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Instead of immediately making her request, Esther showed intelligence and strategy. Instead of begging for the salvation of her people, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. Xerxes readily accepted the invitation and ordered Haman to attend as well. During the banquet, the king asked Esther what her request was, assuring her that he would grant her anything she wanted, even half the kingdom. However, Esther wisely did not reveal her true intention. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to another banquet the next day, promising that she would then make her request. Meanwhile, Haman left the feast feeling honored, but his joy was short-lived. When he saw Mordecai once again in the palace, and he still refused to bow down, his fury increased. Esther 5:9-10 tells us that Haman, though angry, contained his rage and went home, where he gathered his friends and his wife, Zeresh. There he boasted of his wealth, his children, and the honor the king had bestowed on him. but confessed that none of this meant anything as long as Mordecai remained alive. His wife and friends suggested that he have a gallows built 25 meters high and ask the king the next morning for permission to hang Mordecai. Haman liked the idea and immediately had the structure prepared. That same night, an unexpected event would change the course of history. King Xerxes had a sleepless night, and to pass the time, ordered the royal records to be read to him. During the reading, they discovered that Mordecai had saved his life by denouncing the conspiracy of the officers Bigtan and Teres. Realizing that he had never rewarded Mordecai, Xerxes decided to act. The next morning, as soon as Haman arrived at the palace to ask for Mordecai's execution, the king called him before he could speak. Xerxes asked, "What should be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor?" Convinced that the king was talking about himself, Haman suggested that this person be dressed in royal robes, placed on a king's horse, and led through the city with great honor. The king then ordered Haman to do just that, but for Mordecai. Humiliated, Haman had to dress Mordecai in royal clothes and lead him through the streets proclaiming, "This is what you do to a man whom the king wishes to honor." After this moment of humiliation, Haman returned home devastated, and his friends realized that this could be the beginning of his downfall. The next day, he attended the second banquet given by Esther, without imagining that his fate was about to be sealed. At the second banquet, the king once again asked Esther what her request was, assuring her that he would grant anything she wanted. This time Esther didn't hesitate. In Esther 7:3-4, she finally revealed her plea. "If I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases you, grant me life, this is my request, and spare my people, this is my desire. For I and my people have been sold into destruction, death, and annihilation." The king was perplexed and indignant, asking who had plotted such evil. Esther pointed directly at Haman. "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Esther 7-6. Haman was terrified in front of the king and queen. Xerxes, furious, went out into the palace garden to contain his rage. In desperation, Haman threw himself on the couch where Esther was reclining, begging for her life. However, at that very moment the king returned, and seeing Haman so close to Esther, interpreted the scene as an attempt to harass her. Xerxes' anger grew even more. One of the eunuchs, Harbona, mentioned that Haman had ordered a 25-meter-high gallows to be built to hang Mordecai. The king then gave his final sentence, "Hang him on it." Esther 7:10. So Haman was executed on the same gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Even with Haman's death, the decree authorizing the destruction of the Jews was still in force. As a Persian law could not be revoked, Esther once again risked her life and went to the king, falling at his feet in tears. Xerxes, seeing Esther's despair, once again extended his golden scepter, allowing her to speak. She begged for a solution to save her people. The king then allowed Mordecai and Esther to write a new decree. According to Esther 8:11, this new law allowed the Jews to organize themselves and defend themselves against any attack. The announcement brought great joy, and on the day set for their destruction, the Jews united and defeated their enemies throughout the empire. The Jewish victory was so significant that Xerxes allowed the defense in Susan to be extended for another day. In total, 75,000 enemies were defeated, but the Jews didn't take their possessions, proving that they were only fighting for their survival and not for greed. To celebrate this great deliverance, Mordecai instituted the Feast of Purim, recorded in Esther 9:22, as a time of rejoicing, feasting, and gifts, remembering the miraculous turnaround that God had provided. To this day, Jews celebrate Purim in memory of that salvation. Mordecai was honored and given a high position in the government, becoming the second most powerful man in the kingdom after Xerxes. Esther remained queen and was an important influence in ensuring the safety of the Jewish people. Esther's story is a powerful testimony to courage, faith, and divine providence. God acted through an unlikely young woman to save an entire nation. Her example teaches us the importance of trusting in God, acting with wisdom and courage, and being willing to take on our mission regardless of the risks. And now I ask you, where can you be an Esther in your own life? In which situations can you use your position, your voice, or your influence to make a difference? If this story has inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more transformative Bible stories. See you in the next video.